I walked into my parents' house and found them making my 8-year-old son clean the garage alone in 102-degree heat while screaming, "Scrub that garage floor harder, you useless little burden." My brother's sons sat on their bikes laughing with cold drinks. I didn't argue. I took my son home. By morning, my parents were standing outside the garage, holding a red notice that made my brother stop laughing. The yellow gloves were the first thing I saw. Adult-sized, rubber-backed, canvas work gloves sitting on the wrists of my 8-year-old son like oven mitts. Theo was on his knees in the middle of my parents' garage, pushing a stiff bristle brush across the concrete slab with both hands, and the fingers of those gloves flopped over with every stroke because they were 3 sizes too big. A bucket of soapy water sat beside him. The water was gray. An open jug of industrial degreaser was leaning against the front tire of my brother's truck. The jug label said gloves and eye protection required. The gloves on Theo were canvas work gloves, not chemical-resistant rubber. The thermometer mounted on the wall behind the workbench read 102 degrees. My father was standing 4 feet away with his arms crossed. Kyle and Drew, my brother Scott's boys, were in the driveway on their bikes. Kyle was 11. Drew was 9. They each had a cold drink in one hand and a handlebar in the other, and they were watching Theo the way kids watch a show they have already decided is funny. Theo had not seen me yet. His shirt was soaked through. The back of his neck was burned red. His water bottle, the blue one I pack for him every morning, was sitting on the workbench, empty. My father had seen me, though. He looked at me and did not change his posture. He looked at Theo and spoke at full volume, the same way you would speak to a grown man on a job site who was not moving fast enough. "Scrub that garage floor harder, you useless little burden." Theo flinched. The brush scraped sideways. He did not look up. My mother was in the doorway between the garage and the kitchen, leaning against the frame with a glass of iced tea in her hand, and she was watching it all the way a person watches something they arranged. Kyle nudged Drew. Drew said something I could not hear. They both laughed. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I walked across the garage floor, crouched next to my son, and pulled those yellow gloves off his hands one at a time. His fingers were wrinkled and pink underneath. The degreaser had leaked through the canvas. I picked him up. He was light for 8, lighter than I wanted him to be. "Brennan, do not make a scene," my mother said. "We are doing you a favor watching him 3 days a week. You could not afford daycare on a contractor's salary anyway." I carried Theo past Kyle and Drew, past the cold drinks, past the bikes, and put him in the back seat of my truck. I buckled his belt. I closed the door. I walked back to the garage, picked up the yellow gloves from where I had dropped them on the floor, and took those too. I did not say a word to my father. I did not look at my mother. I drove home with the windows down and the radio off and the yellow gloves on the passenger seat and my son in the back seat pressing his forehead against the glass like he was trying to disappear into it. If you are new here, welcome to Karma Unfolded. If you have been with us before, you know how these stories go. But this one is about my son, and I promise you, by the end, nobody is laughing. I bathed Theo that night. The sunburn on his shoulders was already peeling in patches. His forearms had a chemical rash from the degreaser that had leaked through the glove gaps. He sat in the tub with his knees pulled up and his chin resting on them, and he did not look at me when I asked how long this had been happening. "Every time, Daddy, my hand stopped moving on the washcloth. Every time you drop me off. Grandma tells me to go to the garage. Grandpa gives me the gloves and the bucket. I have to clean before Scott's customers come. Kyle calls me garage boy. Drew says I smell like soap. Grandma said if I do not finish, you would not come pick me up." He said it the way children say things that have become normal to them. Flat, without complaint, like reporting the weather. I set the washcloth on the edge of the tub and put my hand on the back of his head. I held it there until he leaned into me. Then I dried him off, put him in clean clothes, sat him on the couch with a popsicle, and went to the kitchen. The yellow gloves were on the counter where I had dropped them, still damp, still too big. I looked at them for a long time. The next morning, before any phone call, I took Theo to urgent care. The physician documented contact dermatitis from chemical exposure on both forearms, mild heat exhaustion symptoms, and first-degree sunburn across his shoulders. She recommended follow-up with his pediatrician and asked me how it happened. I told her. She typed for a long time. That medical record became the first page of my file. Let me explain what my parents are standing on. 5 years ago, Janet and Vance Fossey were 60 days from foreclosure. 31 years in that house, and they had refinanced it twice, missed payments for 6 months, and received a final notice from the bank. My brother Scott did not offer $1. He was living in a rental across town with his wife Amara and their boys, running odd jobs, paying his own bills, and nothing else. I bought the house at the foreclosure auction for $142,000. I used company profit distribution and personal savings, not operating funds. My contracting company, Fossey Construction, had just closed its best year. I put the deed in my name. I told my parents they could stay rent-free as long as they needed. Janet cried. Vance shook my hand and said it was the most generous thing anyone had ever done for him. Janet stopped crying and started planning within a month. The first thing she asked was whether Scott could move in too. I said no. The house had 3 bedrooms and my parents needed their space. Scott had his rental. He was fine. Janet pressed. I held. That was the first time I noticed the pattern. Whatever I gave was measured not by what it was, but by whether Scott got the same or more. The next year I renovated the garage. I framed the walls myself, poured a new slab, ran 2 20-amp circuits for outlets, installed a ventilation fan and a drainage channel. $38,000 in materials. The labor would have cost $24,000 at contractor rates. I paid what I could, fed everyone on Saturdays, and Lyle Gannon, my foreman, refused to invoice his own hours. Theo lives with me full-time. His mother, Nicole, is 2 states away. We share custody through summer visits, holiday alternation, and school breaks, but day-to-day Theo is mine. When he started going to my parents' house 3 days a week after school, I set up a monthly payment, $800 a month for childcare. Direct deposit. Janet said it was too much. I said Theo was worth it. That was 3 years ago, $28,800. There were signs I should have caught. Theo started coming home quieter around 6 months in. He stopped talking about what he did at Grandma's house. When I asked, he shrugged. Just stuff. Once, he came home with a scrape on his palm and said he tripped in the driveway. Once, his shirt smelled like motor oil, and Janet said he had been watching Scott work on a car. I told myself kids get dirty. I told myself my parents raised me, and I turned out fine. I told myself all of this because the alternative was too ugly, and I was not ready to see it. The one time I brought it up with Janet, casually, on a Tuesday pickup, I said Theo seemed tired lately. Janet smiled and said, he has been playing outside with Kyle and Drew all afternoon. Fresh air wears them out. I looked at Theo in the back seat. He was looking out the window. He did not correct her. He did not say he had been in the garage. He just sat there, and I just drove, and the lie sat between us like a passenger nobody acknowledged. Lyle noticed before I did. 3 weeks before the garage incident, I picked Theo up from my parents' house and brought him to a job site because my sitter had canceled. Lyle took one look at Theo's arms and pulled me aside by the lumber stack. That boy has been outside too long without a hat. Something is not right about the way he flinches when you raise your voice at the crew. I brushed it off. I said Theo was fine, that he was just shy around loud noises, that Lyle was reading into it. Lyle looked at me the way a man looks at another man who is lying to himself. He did not push. He just said, all right, and went back to framing. But he watched Theo for the rest of the afternoon. And when Theo fell asleep on a stack of insulation blankets at 4 o'clock, Lyle covered him with his own jacket without saying a word. I trusted my parents with the most important person in my life. I paid them to take care of him. They put him on his knees in a 102-degree garage and called him a useless burden. That was Saturday. By Sunday at 5:47 in the morning, I was standing in front of that same garage with a document I had printed on red cardstock at my office the night before. Notice to vacate. Property address. Owner name, Brennan Fossey. Occupant names, Janet Fossey, Vance Fossey. You are hereby notified to vacate the premises within 30 days. The notice did not physically remove them. It ended my permission for them to live there. If they refused to leave after 30 days, my attorney would file the formal eviction through the court. I taped it to the garage door at eye level. The red paper caught the streetlight and held it. I stood there for 10 seconds, looking at the door I had hung myself, the slab I had poured myself, the ventilation fan I had wired myself. The house was dark. My parents were asleep inside a house they did not own, on a street where I paid the taxes, behind a door I had framed and finished. They would find this notice when they opened the garage in the morning. They would read it standing in the same spot where Vance had stood over my son and called him a burden. I chose red paper on purpose. I wanted it visible from the driveway. I wanted Scott to see it when he pulled up for his first Monday appointment. I wanted the neighbors to see it when they walked their dogs past the house. Red means something. Red means stop. Red means you are out of warnings. I drove home. Theo was still asleep. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the urgent care paperwork, the photographs from Theo's bath, and a legal pad listing every phone call I needed to make when offices opened. At 8 that morning, I called Child Protective Services. I gave them Theo's full name, his date of birth, the address of the property, the dates of exposure, the temperature, the chemicals involved, the urgent care documentation, and his exact words. Every time, Daddy, the intake worker, assigned a case number. I wrote it on the legal pad and circled it. At 8:30, I filed a complaint with County Code Enforcement. I reported an unlicensed commercial business operating from a residential property without permits, commercial use inspection, wastewater containment, or a business license. I described the chemical storage, the client appointment board, the volume of vehicle traffic on a residential street, and the detailing chemicals entering a storm drain rather than a sanitary sewer or containment system. As a licensed general contractor, I knew every code that garage was violating because I had built it to residential standards. Nobody had ever permitted it for commercial use. At 10, I sent a formal letter to Janet and Vance by email and certified mail. 4 pages. Every fact, every date, every dollar, every word Theo had said. I copied my attorney. At 2 in the afternoon, I called the Ears tip line and reported 3 years of unreported cash income from an unlicensed auto detailing business. I also reported that Janet and Vance Fossey had claimed my son as a tax dependent without authorization, collecting up to $2,000 per year in child-related credits that belonged to my return. I did all of this before the end of Monday. The yellow gloves were still on my kitchen counter every time I walked past them. I saw Theo's fingers wrinkled and pink inside gloves that did not fit. If you are still with me, hit subscribe for Karma Unfolded. This story is nowhere near over. Here is what I found when I went back to the garage. My attorney advised me to give written notice before entering. I sent Janet a text and email that morning, owner inspection of garage and exterior due to safety concern and unauthorized commercial use, 3 p.m. Monday. She did not respond. Lyle came with me as a witness. The garage door was unlocked. Inside, a commercial-grade pressure washer worth about $4,000, a wall-mounted vacuum system, 3 50-gallon drums of detailing chemicals, polish, degreaser, and tire shine, a pegboard with 8 different buffing pads, a client appointment board with a whiteboard and 23 names written in Scott's handwriting, each with a day, a time, and a vehicle type. A metal cash box under the workbench. Business cards in a plastic holder by the door, Fosse Auto Detail. Quality hand wash and interior. Call or text Scott. His phone number. My parents' address. This was not a hobby. I have built commercial garages. I have poured slabs for body shops, tire centers, and fleet maintenance bays. I know what a business looks like. This was a business. The appointment board showed current volume. A spiral notebook beside the cash box showed past months. That is where the estimate came from. 23 clients over 2 weeks at an average of $280 per service. $6,000 to $8,000 a month in cash. No receipts issued. No quarterly filings. No sales tax collected. No business license displayed. No commercial insurance on file. No wastewater containment for the pressure washer runoff, which was draining through the slab channel I had built for residential use straight into the storm sewer. I did not open the cash box. I did not remove a dollar or a page. I photographed everything exactly where it sat. The chemical drums, the business cards, the appointment board, the notebook pages through the open spiral, the cash box, the pressure washer serial number, the electrical panel. I left everything in place. Lyle signed a witness log on my phone with the timestamp. In the notebook, visible through the open page, was a column marked J with dollar figures next to each entry. J for Janet. The column totaled $1,800 for the current month alone. There was also a second phone plugged into a charger on the workbench, a prepaid flip phone. The screen showed 47 incoming calls from local numbers over the past 3 weeks. This was the business phone. 47 calls to a phone sitting on a workbench in a garage where my son was on his knees scrubbing the floor. And my 8-year-old son had been prepping that floor between appointments so the next client's car would not park on dirty concrete. I almost put my fist through the drywall. I stood in front of the appointment board with my hands in my pockets and my jaw tight enough to crack a molar, and I made myself breathe through it. I am a contractor. I solve problems with blueprints, not fists. The twist came from my phone, not from the garage. I called Nicole. I asked her to check her old texts from Janet. Nicole called me back 20 minutes later. Her voice was different. Tight, careful, Brennan. Your mother sent me a text 14 months ago. It says, Brennan wants Theo to learn responsibility. He asked us to give him chores. The boy needs structure his father will not provide. I closed my eyes. My free hand found the kitchen counter and gripped the edge. I never said that, Nicole. Not one word of it. I know that now. Brennan, I am sorry. She texted me like it was routine, like it was something you two had discussed. I did not question it because I thought you were co-parenting with your mother the way you co-parent with me. Openly, directly, I should have called you. She was counting on you not calling. Nicole was quiet for 5 seconds. When she spoke again, her voice had changed from careful to cold. I am screenshotting every text. I am sending them to your attorney tonight, and if you need me to fly in for the CP's interview, I will be on a plane by morning. Janet had built a cover story. She had told Nicole, told Amara, told whoever asked that I had requested the work ethic program for Theo, that I had asked for the chores, that I wanted my son toughened up. She had put the words in my mouth so that if Theo ever said anything, it would sound like I had authorized it. The second discovery came from my own tax return. When I filed that year, my CPA flagged a rejection. Theo's Social Security number had already been claimed as a dependent on another return. My CPA pulled the EAR's identity protection transcript. It confirmed someone had used Theo's number. Based on the timing and the address, there was only one household that could have filed it. I brought the rejection notice and the transcript to my attorney. That was the first proof. Later discovery would confirm that Janet and Vance had claimed him for 3 of the past 3 years, collecting about $6,000 total in child-related credits depending on what they filed. I sat at my kitchen table with the bank statements, the ears rejection notice, and the yellow gloves sitting 6 inches from my laptop, and I did the math. The house I bought them, $142,000. The garage renovation, $62,000 in materials and labor. The childcare payments, $28,800. The property taxes I paid every year for 5 years, $12,000 total. The homeowner's insurance, $9,000 total, $253,800. That is what I put into that family. And Janet's cut of Scott's business, 40% of $6,000 to $8,000 a month for 3 years. Gross was not profit. Chemicals, towels, equipment, and fuel had costs. But when you run everything in cash, issue no receipts, collect no sales tax, and keep no clean books, the burden is yours to prove what was expense and what was income. The conservative estimate of her take, $86,400. Cash, unreported. Nobody told me about the business. Nobody asked my permission to use the garage. Nobody mentioned that my monthly childcare payment was funding a system where my son was the unpaid labor and my brother was the beneficiary. I almost drove to Scott's house that night. The anger was not in my chest. It was in my hands. I could feel it in my knuckles, in the tendons of my wrists, in the way my fingers kept curling around things that were not there. But I looked at Theo asleep on the couch with the television still on and the popsicle stick on the floor, and I uncurled my hands and covered him with a blanket instead. The confrontation came to me. Wednesday evening, 2 days after the letter, Janet and Vance pulled into my driveway at 6:40 p.m. Lyle Gannon was in my living room. I had asked him to be there. Janet walked in first. Vance followed. They had read the letter. I could tell because Janet's face was already arranged into the expression she uses when she has decided to be reasonable, which means she has decided to lie more carefully. "Brennan, we need to talk about this letter. And the paper on the garage. Go ahead. You are overreacting." Theo was helping out. He likes being useful. Boys his age need chores and structure, and you have never given him that because you treat him like he is made of glass. He is 8 years old. He was scrubbing a commercial floor in a 102-degree garage with industrial degreaser and canvas gloves that are not rated for chemical use. The urgent care physician documented contact dermatitis on both arms. That is not chores. That is a workplace injury on an 8-year-old. Janet waved her hand. He got a little red. Children get red. I got red every summer growing up, and nobody called the government. You did not have degreaser leaking through your gloves. Vance sat down in the armchair without being invited. The boy was fine. We checked on him. He had water. His water bottle was empty when I picked him up. The thermometer read 102. His shoulders were sunburned through his shirt, and you stood 4 feet away and called him a useless little burden in front of his cousins while they sat on bikes with cold drinks and laughed. Vance leaned forward. I was motivating him. That is how my father talked to me on the farm, and I turned out fine. Your father did not charge $800 a month for the privilege. The room went quiet for 3 seconds. Janet shifted on the couch. I kept going. Scott has been running an unlicensed auto detailing business from that garage for 3 years. No business license, no commercial permits, no wastewater containment, no chemical storage certification, no insurance, no tax filings. 23 clients on a whiteboard, $6,000 to $8,000 a month in cash, and you take 40% off the top, Mom, about $86,000 over 3 years that you never reported. Janet's face tightened. That is Scott's business. It has nothing to do with Theo. It has everything to do with Theo. Theo was scrubbing the floor between Scott's appointments. Your grandson was prepping a commercial workspace for your other son's customers, for free, while you collected my childcare money. I looked at Vance. You called him a useless burden. He is 8 years old. He weighs 61 pounds. The physician's report is in my file. CP's has a case number. Code enforcement has a complaint number. I looked at Janet. You sat in that air-conditioned kitchen and told me I could not afford daycare on a contractor's salary while your other son ran a tax-free business in a garage I built for you for free. That contractor's salary bought your house. That contractor's hands poured the slab Scott parks his clients' cars on. That contractor paid you $28,800 to watch his son, and you put his son to work instead. Janet tried to cut in. Scott needed help. He was struggling. We were trying to support both of our sons. You were supporting Scott with my property, my money, and my son's labor. That is not support. That is a scheme. It was not a scheme. It was family helping family. Family helping family does not involve an 8-year-old on his knees in a 102-degree garage with chemicals on his skin and an empty water bottle while his cousins sit in the shade and laugh at him. That is not help. That is what I reported. Vance's face was red from the collar to the temples. His hands were flat on his thighs, pressing down hard. A vein in his neck was visible, beating fast. His jaw worked side to side. Janet's posture had changed. Her shoulders had drawn inward. Her purse was on her lap, and her arms were crossed over it. Vance tried again. The dependent claim was a mistake, a paperwork mistake. Janet handles the taxes. She must have checked the wrong box. 3 years in a row is not a wrong box, Dad. My CPA flagged the rejection. The IRS transcript shows Theo's number was already claimed. That is what I reported. Vance looked at Janet. Janet looked at the wall behind my head. And one more thing, I said. Nicole, something moved behind Janet's eyes. A flicker she tried to kill before it reached her face. You texted Nicole 14 months ago that I asked you to make Theo work, that I wanted him to learn responsibility, that the boy needed structure his father would not provide. Those are your exact words. Nicole screenshotted every text and sent them to my attorney. You built a cover story so that if Theo ever told anyone, it would look like I authorized it. You lied to my son's mother to make sure nobody questioned why an 8-year-old was scrubbing a commercial garage in the heat. Janet's voice dropped. I was explaining the arrangement. There was no arrangement. I never said those words. You put them in my mouth. You collected my money. You collected my son's labor. You collected tax credits off his name. And you built your other son a cash business in a garage I paid for on a property I own while my 8-year-old scrubbed the floor on his knees in 102-degree heat with gloves that did not fit his hands. That is not an arrangement. That is a system. Janet's mouth opened. Nothing came out. She looked at Vance. Vance was staring at the carpet. When Vance finally spoke, his voice was smaller. We can work this out. I will talk to Scott. He will find another location. We will stop the child care arrangement. Whatever you want. The code enforcement complaint is filed. The fine can start at $4,500. That is not something I control anymore. Janet reached for her purse. She pulled out a checkbook. She held it in both hands like a shield. Brennan, let me write you a check. $5,000 for any expenses, for Theo's doctor visit, for whatever you need. Just cancel the CP's report and take down that notice. We will sort the rest out as a family. I looked at the checkbook. I looked at the yellow gloves still sitting on my kitchen counter 6 feet behind her. That report is not a favor I gave. It is a record I filed. I cannot cancel what you did. Janet's hand with the checkbook dropped to her lap. Her fingers were trembling, the involuntary kind, where the muscles stop pretending and show what the body actually feels. You gave him adult gloves and a bucket. You could not even give him a glass of water. I walked to the front door and opened it. Theo will not be in your house again. He will not be in your care again. The notice gives you 30 days. I suggest you use them." Lyle, who had not said a word the entire time, stood up from the dining table and walked to the door to hold it open. He looked at Vance. Vance looked away. Janet stood, put the checkbook back in her purse, and walked out with her back straight and her chin up. The way people walk when they know every window on the street is watching. I closed the door. Lyle looked at me. "You all right?" "No good" means you are paying attention. The fallout came the way these things always come. One thread at a time, until the whole garment unravels and you realize there was never a seam holding it together. County code enforcement arrived at the property 10 days after my complaint. The inspector documented the commercial equipment operating from a residential garage with no approved commercial use inspection, the client appointment board, the chemical storage without containment, the detailing runoff entering a storm drain, and the absence of any business license or insurance. The citation was $4,500. The cease and desist gave Scott 14 days to remove all commercial equipment or the fine doubled. Scott argued it was a hobby. The inspector pointed to the 23 client names on the whiteboard and the stack of business cards by the door and said a hobby does not take appointments. Scott called me that night. I did not pick up. He called again the next morning. I let it ring. He left a voicemail that I listened to once, "Brennan, this is between us. Leave Mom and Dad out of it. Call me back." I did not call back. There was nothing between us. There was a code enforcement citation, a CP's case number, and a garage full of evidence. That is not a conversation. That is a file. Scott removed the pressure washer the next week. He sold it at a loss, $2,200 for a machine worth $4,000. The vacuum system came out the day after. The chemical drums were picked up by a disposal company that charged him $380. The appointment board came down last. 23 clients who needed to be called and told the service was shutting down. A neighbor later told Lyle that one of Scott's regular customers pulled into the driveway, saw the code enforcement notice on the garage, and asked Scott if a child had been cleaning the place in the heat. Scott did not answer. The customer took her keys back and left. Another neighbor watched from across the street. Nobody waved. 3 weeks later, my attorney confirmed the Ayers report had been assigned for review. The potential exposure was ugly. Unreported gross receipts estimated between $216,000 and $288,000 over the life of the business. Possible self-employment tax, state-level sales tax issues, penalties, interest, and the false dependent claims. Nobody could give a final number yet, but the conservative estimate of combined liability was already past $30,000. Janet and Vance had never reported a dollar of Scott's cash revenue because they never believed anyone was counting. Someone was counting. I count for a living. I bid projects to the nail. I estimate materials to the board foot. I track labor hours to the quarter. And I had just applied every one of those skills to the people who told me I could not afford daycare on a contractor's salary. Amara found out about Janet's text to Nicole on a Tuesday. She called me. "Brennan, did you ask your mother to give Theo chores?" "No, I never said that. The text is fabricated." The silence on the line lasted 8 seconds. Then Amara said, "Kyle told me something last night. He said Grandma told them it was funny when Theo worked. She told them not to help him. She said it was a game." Amara pulled Kyle and Drew from the grandparents that afternoon. She told Scott their boys would not be in Janet and Vance's house until the CP's case was closed. Scott argued. Amara did not argue back. She packed a bag for the boys and drove to her sister's house for 3 days. Kyle, at bedtime that night at his aunt's house, asked Amara a question. "Is Theo okay?" We were not supposed to laugh. Grandma told us it was funny. Amara sat on the edge of the bed and did not speak for a long time. She looked at Kyle's face in the hallway light and saw something she had missed for 3 years. Then she pulled the blanket up to Kyle's chin and said, "Theo is with his dad. He is safe. And we are going to do better." The CP's investigation moved forward. Janet and Vance were required to respond to the caseworker's interview. I do not know what they said. I was not in the room. What I know is that the caseworker visited my house, spoke with Theo with a child advocate present, reviewed the urgent care documentation, and noted the healing rash on his forearms. Theo told the caseworker the same thing he told me. The case remained open for 60 days, and during that time I made sure Theo had no unsupervised contact with Janet or Vance. I almost called my parents during those 60 days. Not to apologize, not to negotiate, just to hear if they sounded different. But every time I reached for the phone, I looked at the yellow gloves on the counter. They sat there like evidence that had already testified and was waiting to be dismissed. 2 weeks after the cease and desist, Scott drove to the garage. The pressure washer was gone. The vacuum system was gone. The chemical drums were gone. The appointment board had been taken down, but the nail holes were still in the drywall, and the whiteboard shadow was still on the wall, a clean rectangle where 23 names used to be. The floor was spotless. Theo had scrubbed it for the last time, and nobody would ever park a client's car on it again. Scott stood in the middle of the empty bay. He put his hands in his pockets and turned in a slow circle. He pulled out his phone, dialed my number, got voicemail. He left a message that was 11 seconds long, no words, just a breath and a hang-up. Scott tried to find a new location. He looked at a bay in a commercial strip on Route 9. The rent was $2,200 a month, plus utilities, plus commercial insurance, plus a business license fee. He had never paid for any of those things because he had never needed to. The garage was free. The water was free. The electricity was free. The labor was free. When he added up what a legitimate operation would actually cost, the numbers did not leave room for profit. He stopped looking after the third estimate. They left on day 28 before I had to file the formal eviction, 2 days before the deadline. They rented an apartment on the east side of town, 2 bedrooms, $960 a month, no garage, no yard, no driveway, no street with neighbors who knew their name. Janet carried boxes to the car while Vance stood in the driveway and looked at the garage door. The red notice was still taped to it. The edges had curled in the heat, but the words were still legible. 30 days. Vacati, they did not ask for help moving. They did not call me. They did not text. Just a quiet exit from a house they had lived in for 31 years, a house their younger son had bought and renovated and paid the taxes on for half a decade, while their older son ran a tax-free business from the garage and their grandson scrubbed the floor between appointments. Scott drove over with his truck and loaded furniture for 3 hours. He carried boxes to the truck bed with his head down and his cap pulled low, the way men carry things when they do not want to be recognized by the neighbors who are pretending not to watch. I drove past the house a week after they left. The lawn was already browning in patches. The garage door was closed. The red notice was gone, but the tape residue was still there. 2 gray strips at eye level, marking the spot where a piece of red paper had changed the math of an entire family. I did not stop. I kept driving. Here is the part I want to end with. The rash on Theo's arms was gone. The sunburn had healed. He did not talk about the garage anymore. The child advocate said that was normal, that children process at their own speed, and that the best thing I could do was make sure his days were full of things that felt safe. So I did. I picked him up from his new after-school program every afternoon at 4. I cooked dinner. We threw the baseball until it got dark. On weekends, Lyle brought his daughter over and the kids built a fort out of lumber scraps from a job site, which Lyle and I pretended not to notice was structurally unsound until Theo asked me to inspect it for code. I wrote him a certificate of occupancy on a napkin. He taped it to the fort wall. On a Saturday morning, 3 weeks after the move out, I was sitting on the back porch of my house with a glass of ice water. Theo was in the yard. He had a new baseball glove on his left hand, kid-sized, the one I bought him at the sporting goods store the week before. Lyle's truck was in the driveway. He had brought his daughter, and she was throwing pop flies that Theo chased across the grass with the kind of loose, full-body energy that only belongs to children who are not afraid of the adult watching them. Inside, on the kitchen counter, the yellow gloves were gone. I had thrown them away the night before. I put them at the bottom of the trash bag under the coffee grounds and the banana peels and the paper towels, and I tied the bag shut and carried it to the curb. They are in a landfill now. That is where they belong. Theo's water bottle was on the porch step next to me, full to the top, ice still floating. Somewhere across town, Janet and Vance had a 2-bedroom apartment, a stack of CPS paperwork, and an ears inquiry notice that my attorney confirmed had been mailed. Scott's detailing business does not exist anymore. No garage, no equipment, no clients. Amara later told me he had applied at a lube shop 2 towns over. Whether they hired him, I do not know. Theo ran across the yard, caught a pop fly in the new glove, and held it up so I could see. I raised my glass. That is the whole story. My parents made my son scrub a garage floor in 102-degree heat and called him a useless burden. I did not argue. I took him home. And by morning, a red piece of paper on a garage door had started something that ended a business, emptied a house, and separated 2 boys on bikes from the cousin they were taught to laugh at. I did not burn anything down. I did not raise my voice. I filled out forms. I made phone calls. I wrote a letter. I counted the money. And I taped a piece of red paper to a door I had built myself. My son has a baseball glove now. It fits his hand. If this story meant something to you, subscribe to Karma Unfolded. Every week we tell stories about people who stood up, not by yelling, but by knowing exactly what they built and exactly what they are owed. I will see you in the next one.